As you undoubtedly know, we live in a world home to many different cultures, creeds, and walks of life. But you may wonder, how does this play a role in the world of real estate? Well, it plays a significant part in passing the real estate exam and succeeding as a real estate professional. To better understand, we must dive into the topic of protected classes. Hello everybody, it's Zach here from RealEstateLicenseWizard.com. Today we're talking about protected classes in real estate. We're going to cover what you need to know for your career and of course what you need to know for the real estate exam. Let's get started. Alright, so there are 7 protected classes in real estate that federal fair housing laws are designed to safeguard. Awareness of these protected classes is key to preventing housing discrimination and ensuring equal opportunity for all. But exactly who is considered a protected class, and how does the Fair Housing Act defend them? Well, let's talk about protected classes to start. So, who are the 7 protected classes in real estate? Well, there are 7 protected classes under the FHA, and they are 1. Race, 2. Color, 3. National origin, 4. Religion, 5. Sex, including sexual orientation and gender identity, 6. Familiar status, and then 7. Disability. So what exactly does this mean? Well, a real estate professional or a landlord cannot deny housing to anyone with these protected classes, nor can they treat them differently. To do so would be a violation of the Fair Housing Act and be against the law. Now let's dive into each protected class for a deeper understanding of how this works. So let's start with race. The FHA protects people against all races. A building superintendent, for example, cannot make racial comments toward a tenant or treat them differently than other tenants of other races. Next would be color. So denying someone housing assistance due to the color of their skin also violates fair housing law. If a real estate agent or landlord asks for a photograph from a potential buyer and subsequently denies them, this can indicate housing discrimination. Next is national origin. National origin means a person's birthplace, ancestry, culture. It is illegal to discriminate against prospective buyers or home buyers because of where they are from. A landlord asking a tenant to verify their immigration status could be considered a form of harassment. Next would be religion. So to deny someone housing or treat them differently because of their religion, obviously that would be a violation. For example, if a real estate agent tries to steer a Jewish family away from a particular neighborhood, a legal issue could ensue. Then there's sex or gender identity. A tenant or homebuyer cannot be discriminated against sex or gender identity. If a landlord were to sexually harass a tenant or deny housing to someone who is transgender, things like that, that could be a violation of the FHA. Familiar status just means children, things like that. So let's say, maybe a family has a bunch of kids and you treat them differently because they have kids versus not having kids. That could be an example of a familiar status discrimination. And then lastly, obviously disability. So people with disabilities are a protected class. So if an apartment complex is not accessible to tenants with wheelchairs, this could violate the FHA. Housing providers must make responsible accommodations so that disabled people have the same opportunities as non-disabled people. It's as simple as that. Now that we have a better idea of who the Fair Housing Act protects from discrimination, let's discuss the Fair Housing Act a little bit and how can we make sure that we're obviously not violating it. So what is the Fair Housing Act? Well, the Fair Housing Act is the law that prohibits discrimination in the buying, selling, renting, or financing of housing. This law also commonly goes by the name Civil Rights Act of 1968 or Title VIII. So how can we ensure that we're doing business all well and good? Well, let's look at some examples of housing discrimination that maybe you might not think are discrimination, or maybe they're a little harder to catch. So maybe charging higher rent for applicants with children, offering lower prices, or extensions for some sort of sexual favor, renting out a housing unit that is inaccessible to disabled people, refusing to repair a unit because maybe the tenant is like transgender or something like that. I'll put the list on the screen. You could look at more of them if you're interested, but I think you get the gist. So those actions all would constitute a violation of the Fair Housing Act. So who exactly enforces the Fair Housing Act then? Well, it's not Ghostbusters. It's the Department of Housing and Urban Development. They are responsible for enforcing fair housing laws and fighting discrimination in housing. According to the HUD's website, violating the Fair Housing Act can result in a hefty fine. So it could be anywhere from $16,000 to $70,000 depending on how many violations you've had. Now, obviously, the stakes can get even higher than that because a lot of times you could potentially risk jail time depending on how big the circumstance is and how many issues are involved. So how common is all this? Well, you might be thinking, great, with all these laws in place, housing discrimination is a thing of the past. Well, fortunately, that's not exactly the case. According to a couple studies, discrimination in housing remains a widespread issue across the United States. We looked at one study specifically by the National Low Income Housing Coalition, and the study showed that African American and Hispanic renters received lower response rates from property managers compared to their white counterparts. This would obviously constitute a clear violation of the FHA, as these groups are protected under those, protected classes. So what can be done to ensure that housing is fair? Well, first, anyone who feels they are a victim of discrimination in housing should file a complaint with the HUD. Now, obviously, as a real estate professional, it's your job to take these things into consideration. If one of your clients mentions something to you, you need to refer them to the proper guidance. So again, that would mean, hey, check out the Department of Housing and Urban Development, review those things, refer those things to that. But obviously, the responsibility primarily falls on those property managers, landlords, and real estate agents that are dealing with these things. All housing providers should follow these federal laws and act in good faith. That means you, a real estate professional or future real estate professional, must play an important role in this issue. Now, you might think, hey, I would never discriminate against anybody. Why do I need to learn all this? Well, even if real estate professionals feel like they're not being discriminatory, they could still violate the Fair Housing Act and cause a legal issue. This is why it's crucial to be well-versed in the best practices for fair housing. Not only will this help you pass the real estate exam, but it could prevent you from getting into hot water down the road. So some general tips, and I'll leave them on the screen. I won't explain them too much, but have a strong understanding of the state and federal law. Be careful with the language that you use in property listings. Get ready to be tested on pretty much anything. And then obviously, treat everyone equally. Again, just do the right thing. Try and be as fair as possible. So you might be watching right now and wondering, well, listen, in my state, there's other protected classes. And that's true. There are other protected classes in real estate other than the ones that I talked about today. States and cities have their own fair housing laws, many of which are not backed by the Fair Housing Act. Now, this does not mean that those seven protected classes don't apply. They apply everywhere. It doesn't matter what state or city you are in. These 7 will apply to everybody. However, there are additional ones for some states and some cities. So examples of that would be age, citizenship, marital status, status of veteran or military service member. Put them on the screen for you guys, and you could pause and read these if you want. But really what is in your best interest is to find out specifically what your state does. So if you actually check out our website, we have a blog post version of this, and it'll kind of help you understand this aspect a little bit more. So what type of housing is not covered under the Fair Housing Act? Well, the FHA covers most housing, but there are some exceptions. Generally speaking, anything that's considered a dwelling, chances are it's covered by the Federal Fair Housing Act. But there are some exceptions. So maybe private clubs, hotels and motels, housing belonging to religious organizations, things of that nature. And again, I'll put a list on the screen so you guys can review it. But primarily, you just, again, need to be aware of the exceptions, which don't worry, we're going to talk a lot about on this channel. And again, the specific protected classes in your state. So what do you need to know for the real estate exam? Well, for the real estate exam, you must be aware of the Fair Housing Act and its protected classes. The Fair Housing Act is the law that prohibits discrimination in the buying, selling, renting, or financing of housing. The 7 protected classes under the FHA are race, color, national origin, religion, sex, including sexual orientation and gender identity, familiar status, and disability. Now, you might feel like an expert right now on the subject, but there's always more to learn when it comes to fair housing. For more on fair housing, click the video here and click here to subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time.